Good evening. It's 5:30 and we have a special session of the Urbana City Council. And then later at 7 o'clock, the Committee of the Whole will be meeting with Michael Madigan as the chair. So would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Ammons?
Here.
Mr. Brown?
Here.
Mr. Jacobson? Mr. Madigan? Ms. Marlin?
Here.
Mr. Roberts? Mr. Smythe? Mayor Pressing.
Here. Do you want to start?
Again, good evening, everybody. I'm going to keep this very short. You've heard me talk a number of times about Sergeant Joel Sanders, the coordinator of our crisis intervention team. Joel is here tonight to present the council with information about the CIT program, about the crisis intervention team program, and then certainly answer any questions that anybody has about the program. Because we have such limited time, I'm going to keep my introduction very short. We'll let Joel give you a little bit of his own background, training, and experience, and then dive into the program. I will say that the PowerPoint program will be available, however, on the police department's website, so nobody needs to frantically take notes. We can get you copies of this whenever you need them. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief Connolly.
Thank you, Chief. As Chief Connolly said, I'm Joel Sanders. I'm a sergeant here with Urbana. Forgive me if I stand. If I sit here for an hour, you'll get bored, I'll get bored. A little bit of my background. I've been a police officer in October will be 24 years. I've been with Urbana for 15. I started my career in a little town just west of here called Leroy, if you've ever heard of it. I spent 3 years in Leroy. I went from Leroy up to the Quad Cities, where I spent 5 years. During my tenure there, 3 of those 5 years I spent as a school resource officer, developing the program there. I then came, what is essentially home for me, came back down here in 1999. And one of the reasons I came to Urbana when I was looking to come home was, at that time and still today, Urbana has the reputation of being one of the best and most progressive police departments in the state, and that's why I came here. And that's why I've remained here after job hopping a couple times for the last 15 years. Since coming to Urbana, I've worn several hats aside from my sergeant duties. The two most pertinent ones to our conversation tonight is I am the assistant team leader for the Metro SWAT team as a crisis negotiator. I've been a crisis negotiator for about 12 years, running different aspects with that team and various different trainings with how to engage and more listen to and interact with individuals. I'm also the coordinator for the crisis intervention team. I've been on that team for about the same amount of time. I've been the coordinator now for about 6 or 7 years. What brings me to you today actually started about 2 years ago, a year and a half ago. And I got asked a bunch of questions by different people in my command about what is CIT doing and what can we do and what are our options. And we're going to get into that as we go. But that was the basis for how we started developing and moving forward from where we're at and where we've been and where we're going. As I move through this program, you've all got access to the PowerPoint. Some of you may already have it. I don't want to stand here and just read PowerPoint to you. You can read that yourself. My goal today in the next hour is to not get through 24 PowerPoint slides. My goal is to get your questions answered and your concerns and your understanding of what CIT is and how it benefits the community answered. Is that fair? So please, if I'm not going in a direction, if I'm giving you information you already have or know, ask questions. If you have questions before we get to the end, ask those. Is that fair? Okay. And you'll forgive the dry mouth. On top of what I do here, I run a lot, and I ran this morning, and so I'm still a little dehydrated. Here's where we're going. I want to talk a little bit about our mental health system, give you a little bit of overview of that, both nationally and locally. Talk about how that system's impacting Champaign County and Illinois law enforcement, and then talk about how crisis intervention team can be, or is a solution. There's not a solution to all this, but a response, a solution to some of the problems we're encountering. Before I go any further, any questions? 1 in 4 people in the United States.
I think you have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, just so we, as you probably know, do fund, our city does fund some social service agencies
Correct.
that are, and I maybe not, I don't want you to digress on this right away, but maybe during the discussion it would be really interesting to see at what point you do things, you know, you have some of the same, you encounter some of the same folks, and it would be very interesting to know how you work together and synchronize things.
And that's exactly where we're going to go. At the end of this, I'm going to show you how we are coordinating with local service agencies and how you can spend the city's money on some resources that we need, aside from the other issues that we're talking about. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
1 in 4 people in the United States have a behavioral health or mental health issue. That's a lot of people. 1 in 7 have a serious mental health illness such as schizophrenia, bipolar, clinical depression, and other such, paranoid schizophrenia, other such things. And as we look at this, you see that 5.4% of Illinoisans in 2012, or 526,000, suffered from a severe mental illness. 526,000 individuals. The current population of Champaign County, give or take, is about a little over 200,000 people. So if you combine Champaign County, Vermilion County, and McLean County, you get about 526,000 people. That's a lot of people. 175,000 children, or 7% of the population under 18, has a serious emotional disorder. We're not even going to broach dealing with the juvenile justice system combining with the mental health system. Most of what we're going to talk about is dealing with adults, not with juveniles. That's a 2-hour presentation, not an hour presentation. It is estimated 2/3 of Illinois residents will go without treatment. So if you take the 526,000 people that are severe, make 2/3, I'm not a mathematician, that's around 350,000 people that are not getting treatment in the state of Illinois. As we look closer to home, the University of Illinois has a very large population and a very large population of veterans. I'm not saying, I want to make this clear, that if you have PTSD, you are prone to violence. That's not a true statement. I am not making that statement. Please don't hear that statement. I will make a statement that PTSD veterans have caused some problems. Fort Hood, just last week, is a prime example of that. PTSD is a disease that has been around numerous years. I can remember when I got into law enforcement, the lawsuits were just starting by cops to cities about covering disability. They're saying they had PTSD. Cities are saying, well, that's not really a disability. We're just now scratching the surface of what PTSD is and is not and will and won't do. One of the examples a friend of mine in the counseling world gave me was that you can look at somebody in an episode with PTSD, some of them, and it will show the same brain scan as somebody with schizophrenia. So they're having significant mental health issues with PTSD. They're part of the 2/3 that's not getting treatment. We're bringing them into our community. We're encountering them within our community. We've had connection to, we're a small community, in relation to Chicago, St. Louis, and others. But we've had connection here in Champaign-Urbana to 3 individuals who've done mass killings. We're not that far removed. It can happen here. Excited delirium is a very real occurrence. We deal with this 76 times since 2008. 76 cases of excited delirium. I'm not going to get into exactly what excited delirium is and all the science behind it. I have personally dealt with somebody who was in an excited delirium state. This was an individual who we deal with on a regular basis, who that evening happened to, whatever kicked him into it, got him there. I can tell you that it didn't matter what I said to this individual, how I addressed this individual, or what demeanor I had, he did not hear it. He was not going to respond to any verbal commands, regardless of how loud, how soft, how mean, how nice. Regardless of what I said, this individual was not operating within the same reality that we were. We did not have a taser available to us. He runs down University Avenue. Before we could get his movement turned, we got him into a parking lot. 4 officers had to tackle this guy and put him on the ground. He came very close to death. And it was not a situation that I ever cared to be in again. So let's just treat everybody. Let's just get everybody in the treatment. Let's get services going. The state of Illinois is going to, in 2006, provided 2.4 of their budget was spent on mental health agency services. 2008, we started reducing that. 2008 to 2012, they've reduced by $101 million of what they're putting into the mental health system. I've had some people tell me that's actually closer to $120 million. And that was current up to 2012. They've not added any more money. They've simply taken more money away. Going back to the 2/3, we're only providing services to 19% of the individuals in the state of Illinois who need services. Any questions up to here? So, what's our response? How's that impacting police officers? How's that impacting those of us out here on the street? I can tell you anecdotally that starting in law enforcement in 1990, it was oddity, it was rare that we dealt with somebody that we recognized to be in a mental distress. I can think of a few suicidal subjects. I can think of here, there, and whatever. I can't recall ever doing an involuntary petition on somebody until several years into my career in East Moline. We just didn't do them. We didn't know how to do them. We didn't encounter it enough to learn how to do it. Because we had services. You'd call somebody. Somebody would come and help you out. We don't have those anymore. We have increased contacts, and we have inadequate options. Mental health facilities are closing. When I got into law enforcement, there was at least 6, maybe 8 mental health facilities in the state of Illinois. There's currently 3. There are fewer and fewer community-based services. Fewer and fewer community-based services. Those of you who know anything about the mental health system know that in the 1970s, the mental health system would take individuals, basically warehouse them in homes, and provide services to them there. They realized this wasn't working, and what we needed to do was get individuals back out in the community and treat them through community-based programs. We would take the money that we were spending on basically warehousing individuals, and we'd spend that money in the community for resources. The problem we run into is they didn't spend the money for community resources. So we took a large population that needed services, put them into the community, and then did nothing with them or for them. That is then, as you increase that, we then remove more and more services from what was there. I gave this presentation, or a longer version of this presentation, to about 115 police officers at the beginning of March. Community Elements has partnered with us, and they were present during this. Sheila Ferguson had a meeting day before. Sheila's the CEO of Community Elements, where she was asked by some of her funders, please look at your budget and tell me what it looks like to reduce it by 14%. They already cannot provide all the services we need, and yet now she's got to reduce it by 14%. Like it or not, police officers are becoming social workers. That's not our primary role. We have to be able to take off our law enforcement hat and set it down and put on our social worker hat. We're not trained to do that. We don't understand how to do that. That's not the job we signed up for. But that's what we're becoming. Because when nobody else can do the job, who does everybody call? The one agency that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we have to become social workers. Any questions? Yes.
So what fraction of the CIT contexts actually result in referral to social service agencies or mental health facilities as opposed to actual criminal charges or disposition?
You got very good questions that I'm getting to.
Okay, you will get to that. Okay, great.
I will not. I'll tell you. I'm not going to give you a specific answer because there isn't one. Because after decreased services, we have increased contacts, and we're dealing with. Last year alone, we dealt with 455 contacts. What is a contact, you ask? That's not 455 individuals. That's 455 contacts. Here's how we count a contact. Joel Sanders has a mental illness, and we get called to Chinooks to deal with him. That's one contact. Joel Sanders leaves there, goes to the Urbana Public Library, causes a problem there. We get called there, we deal with him. That's two contacts. He leaves there, goes across the street to Lincoln Square Mall, has an interaction with the police department there. That's three contacts. So that's one person 3 times. We counted 450 of those in 2013. As the graph you can see, in 2007, we counted 187 of those. Yes?
So when you were first called for to come and assist or to somehow intervene in these situations, you don't know, for the most part, I would imagine, what really is the cause. So at what point do you understand that this is a mental rather than, say, a drug-related misdemeanor action?
You may never know. A lot of the individuals we deal with who have a mental illness self-medicate. So if I am dealing with, there's numerous people I can pick out throughout the community we deal with on a regular basis that are both mentally ill and in a mental crisis who are also intoxicated with either illegal substance or alcohol or a combination of all three. So we're not qualified, nor do we ask our officers to reach a diagnosis of what is the root cause of this.
And so this graph is not differentiating between actual mental illness and just any call for service?
No, that's a good follow-up. These are individuals that we know or reasonably should know have a documented mental illness. Yes.
How many individuals? You're talking about contacts here, but
I can get those numbers. I don't have those numbers. We don't.
okay.
2012, we started counting by name. Up till then, we didn't differentiate between people. It was just the contact.
Diane?
As I understand it, I'm going back to excited delirium. As I understand it, it's that particular condition isn't included in the DSM-MD for diagnosing mental illness. But is there are there any recognized professional organizations who do have a description or a diagnosis that's consistent, or?
I'm not an expert on excited delirium. I believe it is medically recognized. I know our protocol deals with both hospitals, and the medical staff there identify it and recognize it by excited delirium. Is that answering your question?
So the medical staff use that term as well?
Yes, that is a term used by the hospitals. But whether it's, I understand what you're saying with the DSM. I don't know if there's another medical agency that does recognize it.
Bill Brown.
When did we start the CIT training, and how much has it increased as far as number of officers?
We've started it, I believe, 2002 or 3 is when we began training officers for CIT. Like many programs, they come and they go. And it was a program that got started, had a lot of excitement behind it for a variety of reasons. One of the primary ones was we had nowhere to refer people. We had nowhere to put people. We had nothing to do. We couldn't do anything with anybody. And so it kind of, the program existed but kind of fell back. And in 2012, I got together with all the major police departments in the area and with many of the providers, with a representative from the Mental Health Board and some other agents of both hospitals, and we started saying, let's find a solution to this. I'm tired of and we're going to get into what response protocol we have, but I'm tired of this being our only response protocol.
So would you say some of that increase that we see in 2012 and 2013 was the effect of having more CIT officers that would recognize problems like that and count them as contacts?
I think that if you look at this, is 186 a accurate number? No, it's low. What I was getting at, and I'll jump here now to answer your question, is this is the form we fill out to count a contact. Now, the officers are supposed to fill it out, but if the sergeants, if you don't know they had the contact and don't know the form didn't get filled out, there's a good likelihood it didn't get filled out, it didn't get turned in. So the contact's not counted if the form's not turned in. So I would venture to say a lot of arrests in the past didn't get counted, and a lot of the individuals that we dealt with on a multiple basis. We've got one lady, I don't believe she's in town anymore, we dealt with 50 times in a 5-month period. I found that number because I did some digging, not because I had 50 forms. So we have made a push in the last couple years to make sure officers are getting this form turned in. So yes, you do have a count of more contacts simply because we're looking at it. That is a fair statement. But I will also say that we probably deal with, if you told me that number was 1,000 a year, I wouldn't argue against it. That is higher than what we were dealing with in 2007. We are just getting this, we get maybe 2 or 3 suicidal subject calls a day, on average. We didn't get that many years ago.
Could you tell me, is the Police Training Institute training new officers on this?
From my understanding, the Police Training Institute is going to, at some point in the very near future, begin training all new officers to be CIT officers, but that's my understanding. Chief, do you know if that's an accurate statement? Yeah, I've heard that. I don't know that that's an accurate statement.
Okay, thank you. Carol?
I just wanted to clarify that the term excited delirium could also apply to other medical situations a person could be having that you don't.
Yes. We will not, nor will we ever expect our officers to diagnose excited delirium in the street. That is a diagnosis that's going to come from a medical professional after the incident. What we're looking for is somebody who is acting irrationally, is not coherent, is not responsive to verbal direction, shows superhuman strength, profusely sweating, and is acting unreasonably. So we're looking for these signs. Now, yes, you could be that way and be something else.
It could be diabetic or
It could be a multitude
some
of things.
other things.
But when I find somebody who's that way, we've got to protect them because they're running out in the street. They're, like I said, the incident I came up with, the guy's walking down the middle of University Avenue. We can't allow him at 6:30, it was almost 7 o'clock at night, to continue walking down University Avenue. Some of the other ones we've come in contact with, if you don't restrain them, they are going to put themselves into harm's way and have a likelihood of hurting themselves. So since I can't diagnose on the street what their problem is, we're going to react to it and take them and restrain them in the most safe manner possible. Does that answer your question?
Well, I just wanted to clarify that, I mean, I was CIT trained at YSI International,
Okay.
so I'm familiar with it, and I was just trying to clarify that excited delirium could be attributed to other things other than, it could be cocaine use, it could be anything, it could be other medical
My
needs.
experience with excited delirium, a lot of that, it's mental illness along with self-medication, along with other elements that produce that reaction.
Correct.
So we're filling out this form. Starting this year, we have not tracked this in the past. Form was just redid because of the training we did in March. We can now track when we make an arrest, what that arrest is for. We can now track if we make a referral, who we're referring them to. I dug some of that information out in 2012, but I don't have a full listing of who that is to right now. We can also now track, in the past we asked, was an officer injured and was the individual injured? We asked the question, but we didn't track what were those injuries. Starting with this form, we're now asking what are those injuries if they were injured. And I can tell you the rate of injury is extremely low for individuals. And I don't know of any times we've injured somebody, it's been slicing the wrist. An overdose isn't counted as an injury, but somebody who slit their own wrist is an injury. Somebody who tried to hang themselves is an injury. So we're now starting to track what those injuries are.
I want you on the slide you had prior to this one, you had a graph. Yes, this graph here. Does the 450 and the numbers related to that? You said they may not have one of these forms that you just described as the
That number's
crisis intervention call tracking sheet. They may not have one of those forms.
This number's 450 is 450 forms turned in.
450 forms.
So
Thank you.
the real number's probably closer to 1,000. These are the forms that got turned in.
These are forms we
This is
actually
minimum.
have.
These are known numbers.
Thank you.
Minimum. Any more questions on the form?
Did you have other agencies to copy from, or did you have to invent it?
That was a form that was created back when we started this. Currently, only 2 departments. Like I said, we got away from the concept. Everybody, when we started this in Champaign County, kept that tracking. Everybody got away from it. Currently, the only departments tracking are Urbana and U of I. And part of this CIT steering committee that we started, hopefully within a month or less, everybody's going to have a means of tracking. U of I could tell you, U of I could give you numbers, Champaign can't.
But do
Rantoul can't.
you know if other places in Illinois are doing this?
I would speculate that they are. I do not know that they are.
Okay, so this isn't something that's discussed nationally on how you do these things.
If you get into a CIT discussion, the discussion is you should be doing this. Whether other departments are doing it, that I can't answer.
Okay, thank you.
Is that fair enough?
Yeah.
So, what does all this leave us with? We've got these officers who can talk to people and can interact with them. What are our options? Up until recently, we've had 3 viable options, and only 3. The first was hospitalization. Next was incarceration. And the one that I think is the hardest for police officers to grasp is the do nothing. We don't want to do nothing. And we'll talk about each one of these. Hospitalization, to do that, you've got to fit a very, very defined criteria for me to remove your liberty from you and take you to a hospital. I am one who will push the envelope on that, to try and get you services, to try and get you help. But if you're not a risk of harm to yourself and you're not a risk of harm to others, and I can't make the situation fit that, I can't take you to the hospital. Oftentimes, when we do take you to the hospital, let me back that up one. When we do take you to the hospital, what they're looking at is this behavior psychological in nature or is it behavioral in nature? Now, I'm not going to get into the whole difference in that, but if it's psychological in nature, they're going to keep you. If it's behavioral in nature, you're going to go out the door about as fast as I do. So I bring a subject in who is a risk of harm to self or who is causing danger to another, and I will have a good probability I or another police officer will deal with them within a few short hours. And we don't want, there we go. And the problem we run into is if it's a behavioral issue, the mental health system is looking at it. If they committed a crime, if I take you to the hospital because you battered somebody and I think this battery was due to a behavioral health issue, that if you weren't in mental crisis, you wouldn't have battered them. The jail's not where you need to be. You should be in the hospital. I take you to the hospital. The hospital looks at this and says, they committed a crime. Take them to jail. I take them to jail, and the criminal justice system says, they're mentally ill. Take them to the hospital. And where do they end up? Back on the street. And nobody's touched them. Nobody's provided the service to them. Nobody's helped them. And they become this hamster wheel that we run on a regular basis. Like I said, as soon as we get to the hospital, it's a very short time before we're dealing with individuals again. Any questions on hospitalization?
I guess I would like to know what proportion of the people either don't get hospitalized or don't get put in jail. Just get sent back out again with no help.
I can get you exact numbers. I don't have them with
Was it
me.
roughly half or
I would
less?
say more than half end up in the referral or the do nothing category.
Dennis.
And then who at the hospital, if you bring somebody in, is actually making the decision? Is this like the emergency room staff or a nurse at the
that's
station?
a whole, yeah. We drop them off. Process, we take them in. They get introduced to a nurse. They get put in to whatever room the hospital assigns them to. Our officer explains to the medical staff why we're there with this individual. We fill out a petition. The medical staff then medically clears them to make sure, as Ms. Ammon said, it's not a chemical problem, it's not a medical problem, that this issue is a psychological problem. If the medical doctor then decides whether or not he is going or she is going to call in a crisis worker, they could just look at this and say, now this is behavioral, crisis worker isn't going to do us any good, and send them out the door. They could call in a crisis worker who comes to the same conclusion, and then they go out the door.
And when you say out the door, does that mean do they call you back to pick
No.
them up?
No. In fact, we've begged them, let us know if you're releasing these individuals, and it's difficult to get a phone call from them. They can tell us. It's like anything, they're humans as much as we are, they're busy as much as we are, and they don't call us. Any other questions on hospitalization? Incarceration. Just because you're mentally ill does not give you a free pass from committing crime. There are people who demonstrate mental illness who do need to be arrested. The extremes would be the gentleman, probably maybe 10 years ago now, who stabbed and killed his father in Champaign and then chased his mother into one of the schools over in Champaign. This is an individual that as soon as the police get their hands on needs to be getting into jail because it's a safe environment, it's a confined environment, and then move the process from there. There are other individuals I just dealt with the other day who I know for a fact has a mental health issue, who I know for a fact at the time was intoxicated either on alcohol and or other substances. He was causing a problem in a local business. It was threatening to injure somebody in that business. He does not fit the protocol for hospitalization, he went to jail.
So,
Yes.
so the first case you mentioned, as it happens, I know that family very well. So it should be noted that at the end of the day, that man was not criminally charged, and he is in a
Correct.
mental health institution. He's probably going to spend the rest of his life there, but
Correct.
he's in that has been dealt with outside the criminal justice system.
If you had introduced him, and again, in an hour I can't go all the way into this. If you started him at the hospital, then there's a lot you have to go through that would have been difficult to do starting him at the hospital.
Sure, he
So
had
if
to
you
be
start
started,
that process,
yeah.
if you arrest him and you start that process at the
Yeah.
jail, it's
Yeah.
a much simpler and more clean process to get him where he's at right now.
Well, that was absolutely necessary because he was violent. Yeah.
But yeah, and the only reason I bring her up is my CIT training, the mother came in and told us that story. So I know she's okay with that story being used in public.
Yeah, I know her very well. Yeah.
So we are going to, you're never going to get people not arrested. We are going to arrest people who have mental illness. But prosecuting them, even when they needed to go to jail, is very difficult. And all we're doing for the most part, when we arrest the individuals that everybody in here has seen, everybody in here knows, everybody in here has had contact with at one point or another in downtown Urbana for one problem or another, it's solving my problem. It's getting them away from the people they're causing a problem with. It's getting them out of the business where they're trespassing, but it's not solving any long-term problems. And we just get to what I call stopgap incarceration. Do nothing. This has changed since I wrote the slide. We now have one in the county, soon to be two, crisis workers, outreach workers that we can call to our scene if we need them, thanks to Community Elements and Champaign County Mental Health Board and some other funding agencies. That is not an adequate number, and that is only until 6:30 or 8:30, I think, in the evening. So midnight officers don't have access to them. So getting somebody to come to your scene isn't something we can do on a consistent, regular basis. Leaving somebody on the scene is what we do all too often, and we're not solving a problem. But if you haven't committed a crime and you haven't given me the criteria I need to take you to the hospital, my only choice is to leave you on that scene. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. There's sometimes, like I said, I'm somebody that pushes that envelope trying to get them to the hospital, but if I can't push that envelope, they're staying at the scene, and they're not getting any help. So with no other options, sometimes we end up back at jail, sometimes we end up back at the hospital. All this adds to some high recidivism. Like I said, we had one lady who had 50 contacts in 5 months. We had another lady who had 40 contacts in a 6-month period. I stole a term from the community health system called super users. Urbana deals with the same super users as Champaign, as the county, etc. What this does is creates a high cost, financial cost, that if you don't look at is really there. Each cost for us, we're sending 2 officers. We send 2 officers at whatever that officer is getting paid. You send 2 of them 50 times to basically do nothing. That's other calls, other incidents they're not dealing with, but they've got to go to those calls. Increased liability, the more we're touching people, and by touching I mean interacting with, the more we're interacting with people and either trying to do the right thing and get them to the hospital when maybe they're going to now sue us saying we remove their liberty from them, or they need to go to the hospital and we've got to fight them to get them there. The more these individuals don't get help and the more they're out on the street, the more there's a liability of them getting, or a chance of them getting hurt, and a liability to the city of Urbana for us interacting with them. And it just exasperates the problem. It just builds a bigger and bigger problem. I will speak for myself. It gets very frustrating and very tiresome dealing with the same people over and over and over again, knowing I can't do anything. So here's why we're here tonight, and you've had some good questions. Crisis intervention team as a response. Tends to create a safer, more practical, unified response. Champaign, City of Champaign, Champaign County, University of Illinois, City of Urbana, Rantoul Police, all the chiefs signed off on a policy that says we're all going to respond essentially the same. To every suicidal call, every call that requires or is known to deal with a mentally ill subject or believed a mentally ill subject. If Urbana is sent to that call and we don't have a CIT officer, we can call Champaign or University of Illinois or Champaign County and ask them for one. If Champaign County responds to a suicidal subject in Longview and they don't have a CIT officer working, there's a good likelihood an Urbana officer is going to take a long trip down to Longview. We need to get CIT officers interacting with these individuals. We need to get them on scene. Here's why. Let me go back. I skipped one. We're going to look at it differently. We're going to interact differently. We're going to recognize the mental illness where somebody might be recognizing it thinking, oh, they're just drunk. I've had this experience. I was with an officer several years ago. This individual's just intoxicated. And as we kept talking to him, he keeps trying to shoo this person away. They're just intoxicated. The more I interacted with the person, the more and more the signs of mental illness were coming out. The more I started recognizing the signs of mental illness, and we were able to get this person to the hospital. The regular officer is not trained as in-depth as the CIT officer and isn't recognizing it as much as the CIT officer is. Getting the CIT to the scene is the essential first step of recognizing that there is a mental health issue. Any questions? Yes.
Go ahead.
If we have so many cases that are increasing with people with mental health issues, and it could be for a variety of reasons, why aren't all of the officers trained in CIT?
More of a question for the chief, but I can give you what I think would his answer be. In reality, there's a cost to training. And we've got a sworn staff of 55 officers. We've got 20 officers who are currently trained for CIT. I believe, off the top of my head, 5 of those are reassigned to duties outside of patrol. Either they've been promoted, they're in investigations, they're in street crimes. We can utilize them as CIT, but they're not readily available. So it knocks us down to about 16 officers who are CIT trained.
16 out of 50?
Out of 50, sworn course of
Basically
55. It's a 40-hour course. So I've got to take an officer off the street for 40 hours to train them. The training comes around about once a year, locally. We can send them out of the area, but now we're paying even more money to send more officers out of the area. And like I said, it just comes down to the practicalities of trying to get 50 officers trained. I can tell you the new officers coming in, as they come in, part of their core curriculum, once they get into us away from PTI, is when a CIT class comes around, we kick them in it. So we're going to be playing catch up, but you're not going to be able to get a lot of the officers through that, just from a practical standpoint.
From some of the things you said, there is an argument that officers who have CIT training are actually reducing the overall cost for law enforcement and maybe the overall cost to society. I'm wondering if there is any economic analysis that would lead you to say, gee, we need to invest in this. We're actually going to save more in the long run than we're spending.
I know that we have, as a department, looked at CIT training as a necessity. But we're currently down 10 spots. We've got 10 officers, either open spot or officers who are off for whatever reason. That leaves us 50 officers. Our patrol staff's 25. Most of those 10 came out of 25. So to put officers on the street and protect the citizens and then take a group of officers and to train them at the same time, is from a practical, forget the cost, just from a practical standpoint, isn't going to happen overnight. As the CIT classes come around, they come around about once a year, if we're lucky, locally, we get as many as we can in. But again, as we work, my shift, I've got 6 people assigned to my shift. I'm already down 1. If you send 2 people from my shift to CIT class, I'm now down to 3 officers to work. And so from a practical standpoint, that is a hard thing to get done.
Joel, you're putting new officers essentially through the training, which is an interesting way to start. I just wonder if it's beneficial right off the bat, or if you go out and get some policing under your belt, is it more valuable, say, 2 years down the road? And you get more out of it.
I can argue both sides of that. I really can. I think part of CIT working is the officer being invested in the concept. I can train Charlie Smythe to do something, but if Charlie doesn't want to do it, he's not going to recognize it. So getting a young officer who's eager to learn and eager to do things and eager to be part of a change might be more beneficial than the officers who might not buy into it as much. We do get those officers through it, but again, trying to get my shift, the most junior officer is 5 years. Trying to get those officers through it, where am I going to get the other officers, the younger officers, to backfill into my guys' slots? We do get the veteran officers through when we can, but we bring in enough, our attrition's enough, that getting the younger officers in is the most practical way we've got to do it.
So the follow-up question I had was, and you've sort of answered it, is that you think the training should just simply be part of a core new officer's tool belt.
The most practical place to put it is up front. If we can get the veterans in who want to go in, yes. Let's get them through it. But the quickest, the most practical way to do it is getting it up front, in my opinion.
I just wanted a quick follow-up on Mr. Smythe's question. We have trainers in our police department that train on a multitude of areas in our police department. Is there a reason why we don't have a certified trainer for CIT in our department? I looked up a couple and I found several that you can get a certification in CIT and train in-house.
The CIT training is a cadre of officers, not one. The police officers, the only thing the police officers train in CIT is officer mental health. We're not training, when you go through that, the police officer's not training on what to look for or how people with mental health behave. They've only got one segment of a larger picture. So we could get, and sure, I'd love to have somebody in-house trained and be part of that cadre, but they're not. We couldn't train everybody because we'd have to bring in all those other resources to do an in-house 40-hour training.
Okay.
Who's doing the training now? The people that come in once a year, where do they come from?
They come from a variety of different ways. I know Community Elements is very involved with it. The University of Illinois has a couple police officers who are involved with it. The NAMI is involved with it. They send volunteers because part of the training is they interact with people who do have mental health issues, and those people role play and behave as they would if they were in crisis. So there's a variety of different, there's not a group that comes in. It's a cadre that's brought in through the Illinois Standards Training Board, oversees all that.
Okay, thanks.
And I know we're running short on time. Like I said, I want to make sure we get all the questions answered. Do we have anything? We've got, like I said, when you bring a CIT on board and to your call, not only are they seeing things that the regular officer is not seeing, we're expecting things out of them that we're not expecting out of the regular officer. A regular officer goes to a domestic, we expect them to investigate it as a domestic call. A CIT shows up to it and they say, hey, this person's acting funny, we don't know what's going on here, what do you think? They're now looking at it as from a mental health perspective. They're not looking at it from the criminal perspective. So you're getting that perspective once the CIT gets on the scene to look at it from that direction. We're asking the CIT, when they're on scene and they're doing their investigation, to take steps that we don't ask the regular individual to do. If I'm arresting somebody for whatever crime, I don't really so much care who their family is or who other people are that can provide me information about their behavior. But when there's CITs on there, we want to know who their family is, who can we contact, who can we talk to, who can we get more information about this individual so we can document it so that we can refer them to better places. We should be attempting to identify what's going on from a behavioral health perspective. And that gets us to, well, we're going to look at it as find out if they've got other help coming, if they're already in services. RAP plans are not currently in Champaign County. They're coming. Wellness Recovery Action Plans. Community Elements is training some of their crisis workers to be able to do that. We put it in the policy simply because it's eventually going to be here. Justice involved client. If you have a mental illness, you're at the jail. When you leave the jail, they connect you with services. And that's the justice involved client. We're still going to have to arrest people, but we're asking them to defer from arrest if we can, if there are other options available, and if we do make an arrest, to more thoroughly document why that mental illness wasn't part of the offense. We arrested somebody on the 5th floor at Provena, or Presence as it's known now. We need to explain why we're arresting somebody on a mental floor and their mental illness isn't the cause of the crime. You know, were you having a delusion at the time? Were you hearing voices at the time? What was going on? What were you thinking at the time? So we need to take steps further than what the average officer would do. The CIT is giving you that. We have two dispositions we can do. We can do voluntary, which means the individual is willing to do these. And we have involuntary, which would be hospital or arrest. Back up to the voluntary. This is where the number one advantage you get with the CIT is we're looking at it differently. We're investigating it differently. We're seeking different resolutions than the other officers. The other thing you get is we should now be, and this goes back to your question, we should now be referring them somewhere. We should now be saying, calling the outreach worker and saying, hey, could you come here and help me? We should now be giving them 211 cards saying, call this place, they can get you set somewhere. We should now be saying, do you have services? Oh, you have a counselor at Community Elements? If it's during working hours, my shift, I work day shift, let's call their counselor. Let's see if we can get them in. We should now be trying to guide them and the families. Let's guide the families also towards services so that the families learn, here's some steps that you can do. You don't need to call the police in this instance. In this instance, if you'd called the counselor or if you'd called a crisis worker, they could have done more for you than what the police did. So we're trying to reduce the recidivism by getting them to services and getting the family to call somebody other than us when we're not the ones who are needed, but they had nobody else to call. Does that make sense? Here's what we need, or here's what we have. Community Elements, outreach workers, MECAD premise alert, which is connects to the premise, not the individual. But MECAD, if we're going to a house that we've been to and signed up for premise alert, they know to send a CIT officer. It just pops up on their screen, send a CIT officer. United Way 211, if you're not familiar with it, a phenomenal program. I've used it myself. It's call a place in Bloomington, but they know everything they need to know about services in Champaign County. Here's where you get to spend your money. We need, oh, I'm sorry.
On that outreach worker, is that the person who's only available till 8:30 at night?
Yes.
Is that 24? Is that 7
Monday,
days a week?
they've got two workers. One works Monday through Friday, the other's Tuesday through Saturday.
So nobody on Sunday?
Nobody on Sunday.
Okay. So you don't even have 24/7 access
No.
to an outreach worker?
No.
Okay.
The 211-24?
Yes.
Okay.
As soon as we get everybody in the department trained to CIT, let's then get them trained to deal with juveniles. Like I said, that's a whole nother area that we need to focus on and start moving towards. We need more options and resources for juveniles. And I can't even, like I said, I don't have time to get into all that. My dream someday, if I were able to wave my proverbial magic wand, we would have in Champaign County a 24/7. I will even take a day shift to begin with, because it's my shift, spot where I can voluntarily drop people off. We do not have that. Somebody who doesn't fit the criteria for the hospital, they may fit the criteria for jail, or they fit the criteria for do nothing. The example I use on this is we had a lady up at one of our hotels, was in a paranoid state, schizophrenic state, and refusing to leave the hotel. She spent the night there legally the night before. At noon at checkout time, the hotel staff asked her to leave. She refused to leave. We get called. She didn't need to go to jail. Jail's not a place there's nothing going to help her at jail. But the hotel's got a right to their property, and they don't want this person there. We make several phone calls. We call another hotel trying to see if they would take her. This other hotel said, yes, we will take her, bring her to us. We then ask her, well, let's get your stuff. We were out front with her. We had to go back to her room. We go back to her room, and as soon as we get to her doorway, she's like, I'm not going. I'm staying here. All my stuff's here. My life's here. I love it here. I'm not going with you. I'm now trapped. I can leave her there, which isn't what my job is. My job is to take care of the hotel. They have a right to their property. She can't stay there. I can't take her to the hospital. I'm left with one option, jail. And that's where she went. I would love to have, now she might not have voluntarily gone to it, but I would have loved to have an option, say, hey, let's get in the car, let's go to this other place, let's connect you with some resources. I don't have that option right now. I would love to have that option. I would also love to have a segregated mental health wing at the jail, which isn't your guys' issue, I get it, but that doesn't exist. I go back to the individual I spoke of earlier who went to jail, I knew was in a mental health state, and my thinking the whole way to jail is, man, I wish I had somewhere I could take this guy. I wish there was somebody at the jail, a unit at the jail, who could interact with this individual. Finally, we need more just resources throughout the county. We need more places. We can have, everybody in the county can be CIT. Every officer in this department can be CIT trained. And we can interact better, we can interact safer, we can recognize the disease more rapidly. But if we don't have anything to do with individuals, we don't know where to take them, we don't have anything to, where to refer them, it doesn't matter. We walk away with doing nothing, taking them to jail or the hospital. I have flown through my 24 slides. Any questions? Yes.
Well, so some of the resources for juveniles or some of the needs for juveniles are now being addressed by the Youth Assessment
Yes.
Center, which grew out of concerns or actions from the Community Coalition. So how is that funded, and would that be a similar, what you envision for the adults?
The first question I cannot answer. I don't know who funds it. The second question, that is very much what I would love to have for an adult. I would love to have an adult version of the Youth Assessment Center.
And Diane, actually, I saw Tracy Parsons in the audience, and Tracy can certainly address the issue of funding for the YAC because they were a big part of that through the Community Coalition, also through the Regional Planning Commission and other funding sources. I did, and I don't want to interrupt your questioning, but I do want to address very quickly, folks, because I have addressed this in the past, and poor Joel was put on the spot. I personally would love for every police officer in Champaign County to be CIT certified, but we have to remember that CIT training is a specialized training, just like a juvenile officer is a specialized training. We have all of our street sergeants are juvenile certified. By law, you have to be, which requires some additional training. And then we have a series of juvenile police officers that get specialized training as well. That alone, for just those 11 people, is very expensive to maintain that training. the crisis intervention team officers receive ongoing training as well. So it's a specialized unit, just like an accident reconstructionist. I would love every one of my police officers to have that training, but it's a 2-week course that requires annual recertification, and we have to balance the needs of the community with the resources that are available to our police department. The limited number of CITs that we have right now have developed relationships with the social service agencies in the community. They can, Joel zipped through his program, but writing an involuntary petition isn't a 10-minute process. It's a very complicated legal process that requires someone who, it's a perishable skill. If you don't do it a lot and maintain the current laws, you lose that ability. So rather than have 55 people do it occasionally, we reduce that number to balance the additional training, the upgraded training that's required when those new laws come into effect and those new protocols, to develop those relationships with community elements. So at 2 a.m, Joel can call somebody and said, I know you guys are done at 6:30, but can you please come and just address this issue? So for those reasons, it's just not feasible to train every police officer and maintain that training for CIT certification. Again, now if you want to give more officers, I'll be happy to expand my program. So I didn't want to interrupt, but I wanted to take that weight off of Joel's shoulders because he was trying to be very diplomatic because he wants more CITs. I just have to balance it.
Anybody else have a question? Charlie.
Chief, since you're sitting there, we've talked about a half-time position, and some other things have developed now in the community. Do we need to plug this hole that's from 8:30 to morning? Is that what's left that needs to be filled?
Well, actually, so much more needs to be filled. The community resource center is what needs to be filled. That place, that void, that any police officer who recognizes, I don't want to take the person to jail, he's not a danger to himself or others, therefore he doesn't meet the criteria for hospitalization, but he's urinating down the stairs of the parking deck, and every person who encounters him, he's threatening bodily harm, but we know that he's not in control of his senses. We need to be able to get treatment for that, a risk needs assessment and treatment for that person right now before we just end up taking him to jail. The Community Resource Center, in my opinion, is the perfect solution to that. Now, Joel did mention that we do have emergency crisis workers as of last week that are willing to come out into the community and address those needs. But I can tell you, for anybody who's worked, for instance, we have the same program developed for children who are in danger through abuse or neglect. We have crisis intervention team or crisis workers from Department of Children and Family Services who come out and then assess the child, get them the proper care and whatnot. And that's a 2-hour ordeal just to get the people to the police department and connected with services. So that's a long, drawn-out affair.
When we were talking about this last year, it was a half-time position.
Through the CRC.
Through the CRC, and there were other pieces of it. I guess maybe we should talk about how we get back on the road to putting that together and what it's going to take. Yeah,
absolutely. And the Community Coalition actually is focusing that this year to try to address those needs, because it's not just Urbana that's dealing with the problem. This is a county-wide law enforcement community problem. Quite frankly, it's a statewide problem because, as Joel indicated earlier, the lack of, there are 140 people waiting just to get mental health from a professional psychiatrist just to get a consultation. So I mean, the need is clearly there. The ability to address those needs are sorely lacking right now. But the CRC, in my opinion, is a start to that process.
So last year you were going to work with the city of Champaign. We were going to have something in our social services budget. So are you resurrecting that for this year?
Well, I would like to, I can't resurrect it because the CRC went a different direction. They didn't get the funding at the time we asked for it, and as a result of that, they reallocated their resources. So it's not available now.
So is the CRC in Champaign, or where, is this a
It's at
facility?
Presence Hospital. Oh,
So
was
it
at
is a,
Presence.
it is a facility in existence already?
No, well, it is, but it's not to the extent that the police are able to use it. The original model was designed for the police to have those non-arrest people
As a drop-off?
as a drop-off site. We requested that funding, it didn't come through, and as a result of that, and funding not just specific to Urbana, the funding sources just didn't come to fruition, and as a result, they went a different direction.
But it could become what
Absolutely.
you wanted.
It
So
could.
charity care could, I mean, that would qualify as charity care for the community, correct?
I don't know.
Be a good use of that definition.
Bill?
Do you have a number of how much it would cost to get something started like that? As
No,
far
I
as
don't.
Staffing or facilities?
Now, Joel is a perfect person to work with Sheila Ferguson and others in Community Elements and others at the Regional Planning Commission and others through Access Initiative and all these different social service agencies and these treatment agencies that have a wealth of talent and experience and the ability to do that, but we got to get the ball rolling again.
Well, Presence is announcing that they're doing all these charity cares, so is that one of the things that they're talking about? But maybe we need to ask them.
Right.
From my understanding, where the problems run into is they have to have I might have my terms wrong here, I think a nurse practitioner on staff to have us be a drop-off center, and that's not something that Presence can fund right now, and the money's not there to fund it.
They're
through
not
another
paying their
source.
taxes, they ought to be able to fund it. Anyone else? Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm sure we'll be talking about this more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
So I just had one other point. I don't know if we're going outside of our purview, but I wonder if we can catalyze a conversation among the players here, perhaps by inviting them to a session like this.
Yeah, I think
to
we
have a
have to
public
talk about it.
dialogue on that, or in some way, get this, see if we can play some role in getting the potential players talking with each other in a public venue.
Right, I think we need a town meeting about it, probably. And I know there are a lot of people here. We have a meeting starting at 7, so we're not done with this topic, so we will schedule something else and probably try to get some public input on it. So, there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned, but we're not finished with this topic. So thank you all for coming.